Okay, so we're still trying out different camera angles. Um, if you have any questions, make sure to ask them in the live chat. It can take anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple minutes to show up. So, news for today. I turned in some more filings in the lawsuit that I have against the state for ballot access. And something I find to be just awesome and super exciting is there are two other independents that are scheduled to make ballot. Lisa Savage and Max Lynn, both of them have sent in affidavits of support of having me be on the ballot. There is also two of the Democrats who have sent in affidavits of support, Betsy Sweet and Bree Kidman. One of the things that I truly love about ranked choice voting is we have the ability to have um, a more collegial environment where we can really support each other and acknowledge good things about each other. So I really like that sort of everybody who's made ballot for the most part came together and said, hey, there was a pandemic, and we agree with Tiffany that if most or all of our signatures were gathered before the pandemic hit. She was sort of the only candidate standing that had a substantial amount of signatures. She continued to try and work on this in good faith, and she didn't get a whole lot of response from the Secretary of State. And really, unless you have millions of dollars or a party behind you, there is just no way you're going to be able to make ballot in a pandemic without major accommodations. The Secretary of State and the governor's office sort of didn't respond or said no to all of the reasonable accommodations I asked for. So it was really nice that we're going to have other candidates sort of come together and say, hey, we may disagree on a lot of things and we may agree on some things, but one thing we really all agree on is that democracy needs to be accessible, and I think that's just awesome. It's great when we can shift campaigns and competitive races to being about what's different ideology, what do we agree on, what do we disagree on, instead of who has the most money, um, who can buy the most ad time. That should not be what our campaigns are about. Our campaigns should be about where we agree, where we disagree, and what ideology and beliefs and views we want to send forward to whatever office, in this case, Washington, D.C. So I thought that was pretty cool. I turned in those affidavits and some revised filings on Monday. The state has until, I think, July 10th to respond, and then I have a couple days to respond, and I should know July or August whether or not I'm going to be on ballot. So I'm going to continue to campaign as if I am on ballot, and we'll see how it goes. Tomorrow, I am turning in what signatures have come in the mail and that we have back to the Secretary of State. So the accommodation that I've asked for in my filing to the state, or it's actually federal court, the accommodation that I asked for is I said, hey, look, just hold me the same standard as the parties. They have to get 2,000 signatures. I have more than 2,000 signatures. Just hold me to that standard. We didn't get any accommodations that were requested during the collection period. So here is my good faith collection. I collected at least as many signatures as multiple people who are on the ballot. Please hold me to that standard. So I'm going to be turning those into the Secretary of State's office tomorrow. And then I can kind of take a deep breath finally, and the lawsuit is going in the background. So you'll see me online focusing a lot more on main raising, a lot more on policy ideas. The lawsuit and signatures at the end have taken up a tremendous amount of my time and focus. Excuse me just a second. I have an alert going off. I always turn them off, and they seem to pop back up. So yeah, we're going to be focusing much more on campaign stuff, which I'm really excited about. As far as other things that are going on, I apologize for the bandana. We're in our hopefully last live thing on that. The staples are supposed to come out on Thursday morning, so hopefully this will be a thing of the past. I feel like I'm out camping and haven't taken a shower for a few days or something, and that's why the bandana is there. But alas, it was just a really minor thing that I had to have taken care of. So as far as what's going on in politics, politics is Ugly. We've got a lot of ugly things going on right now, and not that that's a huge departure from most of 2020, but we do have some ugly stuff going on. We're getting a little bit deeper into finding out that it seems pretty credible that Russia was paying essentially a bounty on anybody who took out our troops, and that's pretty awful. Our executive branch seems to not be particularly concerned with that. As other people have become concerned, it's kind of moved to this weird, didn't see it, wasn't me, shaggy defense. So we know we credibly know, we don't know for a fact, but we credibly know that information about Russian involvement in putting a bounty on troops was in a briefing book in late February. We don't know how much our executive branch read. So I personally think the buck stops at the top. I personally think that it is our president's responsibility to be aware of that. It's a really big job. A lot of people don't want to do it for that reason. It's a tremendous amount of responsibility, and that means you have to take care of our armed forces. So others are saying that it's a failure of essentially White House staff or his core team not pulling that out of the briefing book and sort of flagging it. To me, it doesn't matter. That's a really big deal, and we have been encouraging Russia to get really involved in the world again when they're putting a bounty on our troops. That's not okay. So there is that relationship between our president and Russia is just very uncomfortable. There's obviously something that is amiss there. There is obviously a loyalty that is just really uncomfortable and really inappropriate. So that's something that's come up today. It's been coming up for the last few days, but that certainly resurfaced today. There was an article that came out earlier today that was talking about how the United States has bought up all of a drug that seems to have some efficacy with recovery from COVID, and thus depriving basically the rest of the world for at least 3 months. Though we do have a responsibility to put our country first in DC generally, sometimes putting our country first is putting the global community first. So I don't know that that was a really appropriate choice because, depending on how COVID is moving between continents, what travel patterns are, what resources each country has, that may not have been a very great thing. We also don't know exactly how effective it is. It's been through some trials, but we could end up in another, I can't even say it well, hydrochloroquine issue, where we end up investing in something that maybe that hadn't been studied thoroughly enough. And now we're stuck with a ton of those tablets. So we're handling disaster management in a very chaotic manner instead of having a thorough, comprehensive plan. And you're always going to have to adjust on the fly. We're not doing that. We're just sort of bouncing all over the place. We're shooting from the hip, and this is just not a great way to manage a crisis. It's becoming pretty apparent. A lot of the numbers are going up pretty sharply across the country for COVID. And it's becoming pretty apparent that perhaps individually we're lovely, but as a society we make some pretty unwise choices as a collective group. And COVID is going to be here for a long time. And I have been having court events have been by video lately, and it's been coming up in court events. I work in family law that transportation is going to be really limited. We're having struggles with parents who live in different states because we're just not going to be able to travel the way that we did very freely until this March. So that's a concern. It's going to have further impact on our economy. It appears that any aid packages are just not being handled down in DC. I find that to be really unfortunate. Coming out of the Senate, it seems like the attitude is, well, we gave you all that $1,200 and that's not going to last for that should last you forever. And I don't know how much people in the Senate think it takes to eat, but it's definitely a lot more than has been provided. Unemployment benefits are going to be running out, the temporary bump in unemployment. And frankly, we shouldn't be tying unemployment to the kind of relief that we're giving. It is being used in many cases as a mechanism to force people back to work, and people want to work when it's safe. The payments that we're putting in, they're not adequate to provide for most households. People are still going to want to work on top of that. It's a safety net. It's not some sort of great bonus. Listening to the Senate debate, oh my gosh, those lazy poors, the $600 a week bump is just not worth it for them to return to work. And maybe that's true. Maybe what we should be doing is a more UBI-like payment. I think it would be a much better choice. And I think people would still return to work at fairly similar rates, maybe a little bit reduced, because people who didn't have to choose between severely compromising their household and having that support of just a bare minimum amount of financial support, that would be a better space. I'm just incredibly disappointed in both houses or both chambers of Congress that they haven't put in a UBI-like payment. If we're going to test it on our government, if we're going to test it and see if that works, a pandemic is the time to do it. And so I think that they've really mismanaged the financial part of this. The way that we're supporting our citizens is just bunk. So the collective federal response is to reelect Donald Trump. I don't know that that's true. I mean, I think maybe that's what their goal is, but they're just so bad at it. I received, so we have a home number that we don't give out. It's used so, the children can call grandparents, or if we run to the store, so they can call us if we've, tested them with a little responsibility. And we get a phenomenal amount of survey calls to that. And, just with the questions, you can always tell who's sponsored the survey. I had one that was taken almost 20 minutes. That was clearly written for Donald Trump. It was clearly designed to make you think Joe Biden was a ridiculous person. But the way that they're posturing the pandemic response in a lot of these questions and a lot of their messaging, I don't think that I don't think they're thinking about the pandemic response in that context. And if they are, boy, they are not going to be successful. So the next comment is working parents with children need more support. I absolutely agree. So again, working in family law, as things are getting closer to, hey, what's going to happen in September? We're into the period of time that would normally be summer vacation for the kids now. And that's when a lot of households, if they haven't done so, start talking about the fall and what they're going to do with kids with school, if there's any swaps. And I can tell you that not only are the parents that I work with, they've pretty much all been informed, be prepared. There's a real good chance there's not going to be school in the fall. Certainly not in the form that we're used to. The courts are kind of saying that too. The courts are saying, well, we have no idea. We don't know what court is going to look like in the fall. We don't know what schools are going to look like in the fall. I know that I just had to send a motion up to court. I was scheduled for my very first in-person event since March in mid-July, and I had to send something up saying, I'm so sorry, my spouse is an essential worker. He's not physically going to be in the state, and there's no childcare. So we still don't have any childcare centers open. We still, not functionally. There may be one or two here or there, but they're just not functionally open. We still don't have a real good game plan for schools. And I think part of why you're seeing that is if you look at the COVID numbers across the country, it's just staggering how much it's shooting up. And there are states that are clearly, obviously, hiding and manipulating data, and it's just going to make it worse. I can hide the scale, but if I've gained 5 pounds, my pants are going to tell me, right? We can hide the testing results, but if people are just dying, it's going to be pretty obvious that it's growing. So I am very concerned that we're not handling a pandemic in a data-driven way. I'm concerned that we're not handling it in a humane way. And I'm concerned that it's really going to just tank our economy. It's going to make it really hard for our kids. I mean, I think that we have to just plan that we're losing one more academic year for our kids, which is horrifying, depending on where children are developmentally. It also deprives a lot of children of food. It takes out a lot of domestic violence reporting. So it's a pretty terrifying thing for kids right now. Didn't Canada do UBI? It would be helpful if we could see how models of that work in real life. Yeah. I mean, I think several countries have stepped up and sort of done UBI in this in some capacity, and just done some sort of reoccurring payment or paying for people to stay employed and through paying and helping employers with a portion of salary, so people are still getting paid their salary. There's a couple of, probably more than two, there's several models for how they're handling it, and I think that all of them are working better than our method, which was to just not really handle it at all. And it's really problematic. I mean, we have a federal government that is just, it's not functional, and even if you take the executive branch out of it, it's not functional. So we don't have a lot of collaboration, and we don't have a lot of people that are working in a way to address basic and perfunctory needs, let alone pandemic needs. And this is a crisis. It really needs people to pull together and work past for good solutions, not work past for, oh, we did something. And I really feel like the last pandemic relief that we got was just like, well, we did something. Same thing with PPP. It was clearly inadequate. There's all sorts of problems with it. And again, it's almost like the government's response was, well, whoopsie. I mean, we did what we could, and we're going to brag about how great it is, even though it was confusing and unclear and not really helpful. And a lot of people had to return it, and some people abused it. And it doesn't help a huge amount of businesses. So I think that the problem is they're trying to design all these programs that catch all these problems, but the problems they're catching are smaller than the problems they're creating. So, we just need to help citizens. And if we accidentally help some rich people, we can grab that back in some sort of tax code adjustment at the end of this. We need to make sure that we're helping all of our citizens survive this and survive it in a way that's economically healthy. And if we pay some of them a little bit more than they would make on their own salary, that's fine, because you know what? We need people out there putting that money back in the community, and people who are poor spend their money, right? They spend it. If they have a few extra dollars, they either are going to pay down debt, or they're just going to have a night where they can't take it and get takeout. And all of those things are helping keep our community going. The amount of money that we have given in corporate subsidies is such that we could have provided some really substantial help for people through this, and that money would have flowed right back up to most of those corporations anyway. So I don't know if it's that they're naive to economics, or they are just committed to a bizarre philosophy of bootstrapping it through, a once in a century pandemic. I don't know why people are being purposefully feckless in the policy that they're creating, but it is problematic. We have a pandemic, and we are not well supported. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these things develop. I think that Congress is probably going to continue to punt the ball. We saw an interesting, hold on, let's see, what was the proposed UBI? How to arrive at a deal amount, 1,000, sure would help. I think that Yang might have been proposing 1,000 a month, but I don't, that would not be what I would propose in a pandemic. In a pandemic, I think that we should probably be giving people, maybe $2,000 a month per person in a household, maybe a lesser amount for children, but basic living expenses are more than $1,000 a month a person. If you're a single person, it's going to be problematic, and that would take care of a huge amount of our issues. That would take care of landlords with evictions. That would take care of a lot of the legal stays we have in place, we wouldn't necessarily need to, because those needs would be met, and the money would keep circulating and flowing through the system. And again, anybody who maybe didn't deserve the funds, we can capture some of that on the backside with taxes or adjustments to tax codes. So I don't think $1,000 a month is adequate with where we are. Yet somehow, I mean, the the stimulus payment that was given to all of us, it has been. I don't know how they're thinking people are surviving on $120 a week. That's just delusional. And I've seen some other proposals for things, like people who I can't remember which person it was in Congress. They had proposed wanting to help with a tax credit at the end of the year, but that doesn't help parents going through this. First of all, you need the money in the first place to pay the child care to get the credit. And if you're in a place where you haven't been working, you don't have the money to pay for the child care. And that's assuming you can find a child care provider that's open. The problem we've run into is all of our regular child care providers are closed, and anybody else remaining there's so much demand that good luck getting a spot. Most of the camps are closed. There isn't childcare. So I think that a lot of proposals for taxes. I got a message that was held for review, so I have to go see what that is. Tax credits are rich people bullshit. I think there's probably some good things about tax credits depending on how they're done, but they're a good tool to incentivize behavior. They're a good tool to help offset some of the costs of being middle class and being poor as well. If you are poor, a tax credit really doesn't help you that much. You almost need an advance where things are paid on your behalf, and then you reconcile it with taxes. So, there is some merit to tax credits, but the way that we have our tax code done, it is based on people who are elected to office being able to create a hyper niche tax deduction so they can go brag to their constituents that they came up with this crazy tax deduction that lets people deduct some portion of a bicycle so it's better for the planet. And realistically speaking, because of the way the tax benefit that they've written is structured, maybe like 3 people a year can actually use it, but they can go run commercials forever. I incentivized multimodal transportation and non-carbon based transportation. So I am a champion of the environment, and it could all tie back to one silly little tax credit that nobody could use that wasn't effective. So I think there are some real purposes for getting our tax code right. I do think there are some good reasons for deductions. I think there's that is a lot of the carrot that we have available is our tax code for guiding behavior. We have 3 basic mechanisms in Congress that they can use. So they can use a carrot, which is either funding or tax deduction. They can use a stick, which is some sort of prohibition, penalty, or tax, or they can just outright prohibit. So we basically got carrot, sticks, and prohibitions. So it's one of the very few tools we have. But yeah, tax credits are very often used either for marketing materials, but not actually to accomplish anything, or to help the hyper wealthy. Our tax code, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was not designed to help the average person. That was absolutely designed to help people who are wealthy. So it's really unfortunate that we're sending a lot of people to DC that either are poorly motivated, or maybe they just don't understand that the stuff that they're doing doesn't have the outcome that they're trying to create. I think it's really easy to say beautiful words. I think it's really hard to craft laws that make those words our reality. How much do you think Congress could actually get done if they weren't campaigning 24/7, 360? If they weren't always campaigning, I think they could do their jobs. I think that what Congress has become is there's really very little time to do the job of legislating. The amount of money that you have to raise on a daily basis to stay in office is, it's a full-time job. It's obscene. I mean, and actually that's one of the things that I get to focus on now that I'm really excited about. So Maine can do something really cool. If we can start from the presumption that I will be on ballot, we have the opportunity to fundamentally alter politics, and it takes nothing. It costs nothing. It costs 0 pennies to do. If enough folks in Maine take a leap of faith and say, look, Tiffany she's a generally reasonable person. She seems competent. She kind of nerds out on law. That's her thing. I'd be willing to entrust her with our law. So, I'm just going to vote her as a number 1. I mean, I don't think she's going to get elected. I'll put, the Democrat or the Republican as number 2, but I really am mad about money in politics. So I'm going to put her as number 1. And if enough people do that, I take the race. I mean, if I win this race on, say, $2,000, that will fundamentally alter politics on a national level. And that's something that we can do that is so cool in Maine because we have ranked choice voting. So I think you'll hear me talking more about that in the coming weeks. And I think that is going to just be, all the policies and the stuff aside, I think that I'm just so, I think I'm reasonable. There's very few people who find me unreasonable. They might find me eccentric. They might think I'm a little left or a little right, or, maybe they don't agree with me on every policy. It's silly to think that we're going to agree on every policy. But I don't think there's a whole lot of people that look at me and go, oh my gosh, she is just a totally irrational person who has no grounding in fact. I think I appeal, at least as acceptable to a wide range of voters. And I think that we have the ability to just thumb our noses at politics and just forever change the conversation. If this is $100 million race and the candidate wins it with like $2,000, that tells every single person who has been lying to our public and saying you have to have millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to win elections. It says, no, that's an auction. We don't have auctions. We have elections. And if we change our voting system to where we can vote who we really want in, we don't need that money. It's gone. It doesn't matter anymore. We're done with that. And then we can really start focusing on our candidates having a good hiring process. We can really start focusing on saying, okay, well, what are the quality of your positions? Let's have real conversations. Let's dig in on these issues. Let's have more than 32-second answers where, you're getting flagged to wrap it up. Let's have real conversations instead of debates. Let's get a few candidates together in a whiteboard and diagram out how we're going to fix things and see how well they work together. I think we can really change the tone of how we campaign. And going back to the lawsuit, we can take what we're seeing there, where candidates are stepping up for each other and saying, hey, our policy positions aren't the same, but there's no benefit to leaving somebody off of the ticket who's tried. There's no benefit in Maine to that. So what should a Dem Congress do day 1 in 2021 about campaign finance reform? What should we do about Citizens United? I do not think that you are going to get rid of Citizens United until you have some people like me who are elected without money. There's no political will for it. You could go an entire career and just never overturn it. And, one of the things that I've been talking about a little bit more lately is I've heard this out of the top 2 candidates in this race. When they talk about judicial nominees, they're talking about, I want somebody who respects precedent, but that's actually not true. Neither one of them wants that. They want candidates who respect the precedents they like and then fix the wrong decisions for the ones they don't like. So until we get a bench that, we can look through their historic things and historic orders and opinions and writings and things that aren't even orders, it might be a blog that they did, it might be a speech they did, but we can look through their body of work and it shows that this is a person that's generally into equality, that's generally wants something to be equitable. Until we get a solid bench that is more concerned with how the law functions than which party got them there and kind of their lean and what their ticket of admission was to get their position on the bench. And I don't think we have that in Maine on a local level, but I think we certainly see it in some other states, and we certainly have seen it with a lot of federal positions in this administration. I don't think we're going to overturn it with courts, which means our only option to overturn it is legislation. And the only way you're going to overturn that with legislation is to show the people who got there using all those gobs of money that it was unnecessary, because their defense 100% of the time is going to be, look, I did what I had to do to get here, and I can't help you if I couldn't get here. And so I just don't think until we have some people that win races with very low dollar amounts and have them be big, important races. The Maine Senate race is a big, important race. And if I win that for $2,000, I think it changes the conversation from you need to have money to, there was that lady up in Maine and you don't need money. We don't. We can change the way that we do this system. And I think until you can start injecting that in the system, you're just not going to get the money out of politics. You're just not. So I don't think there's anything that a Dem Congress can do on day one in 2021 to change that, because you're not going to get enough votes to fundamentally alter it. You're not. There are certainly some things you can do to limit corruption, but getting the money out of politics, it's until you have some people that show that you can objectively do it, I don't see there being the legislative will. And I think that a lot of people who are promising you, I'm going to vote to overturn Citizens United, we're going to get that done, they know that the votes aren't there. It's not true that that's going to happen. And it's, again, probably not going to happen in our career if we don't start voting for people that say, I'm not going to take the money, I'm not going to do this. Sorry, this is very loud coming by, but I think that you have to show that it's possible. And that's not really that different than running as an independent, right? In Maine, independents are only considered valid when we win. And then once we've won, it's like, oh yeah, of course there's independents, right? Like, look at Angus King. Of course we can have independents. When he ran for governor, of course we can have an independent for a governor. As soon as they win, it looks viable. So as soon as you have a few low dollar candidates that take races, it's going to look viable. It just doesn't look viable now. So we need fair access to the ballot. I agree. And that's one of the things that I've really worked on this year. I've talked to you all a lot about it. I also think that it's something we should be talking more about. Ballot access is prohibitive. It is hard to run for office. In Maine, to run for the local offices, it's actually not that hard. It's like get 25 signatures. It's annoying, but you could do it in an afternoon. But if you're running for a larger office, it is prohibitive, and it's almost impossible in a pandemic. And the whole point is to limit options, and they're trying to avoid ballot clutter. But we're not having 50 people on the ballot anytime in the near future. It is hard to run for office. Getting signatures is one of the more bothersome and time-consuming parts of it, but it is an additional full-time job, and I run with the thought that an average middle-class person should be able to run for office and continue to work and have a family and have a life. Like, you should be able to do that. I don't think you can do everything, but I do think you should be able to run for office. And if that's not attainable, we're doing it wrong, because otherwise what we're going to get is people we don't want doing the job. But those signatures are a bothersome part of it. They're not the only part. And I really have a hard time thinking we can't bring that to a more modern world or a less prohibitive world. And I really have a hard time thinking that if they made it more accessible, that somehow we would end up with so many people on the ballot we couldn't afford to print ballots. That seems very unrealistic to me. I do think specifically in Maine, there's things we could do that would, I think, really alter the way people run for office, and we could have it where, instead of there being these high thresholds, like instead of 4,000 signatures to get on the ballot, maybe you only need 400, but you have to personally collect them. I think that might be a good way to do it, show you're really invested in it and that you've connected with your community. Or if you're going to have these high numbers, have it so it can be done online or at least by mail, so that people can participate a little bit more easily without having to be directly point to point. You'll get larger groups that way. I think, structurally it made sense for me to spend a lot of time in the bigger cities. And I don't like that. I want to be able to go out and spend more time in the smaller cities. I want to be able to go out, though I don't mind collecting signatures generally, because I do have the opportunity to talk to people when doing that. I don't like that I have to time it in my head. I don't like that I have to have, like, right here, thinking, I really want to talk to this person, but I can't. I have to end this conversation because I have to get X amount of signatures per hour. And if I don't get the right amount of signatures, then I'm going to have a ballot access problem, which I have this year because of the pandemic. But I don't like having that clock going in the back of my head. I like to just be able to have conversations with people. So I think that limiting or changing that is something we might want to do. That's a state legislature thing in Maine. But I think it's certainly worthy of being looked at. It brings excitement back to the races. Maybe that will draw out more voters. If you're talking about fair access, I agree. Having candidates we can really care about, I think that matters. And I'm really honored that a lot of people do seem to care about me as a candidate. I think I'm pretty average and boring, and I'm okay with those things. Like, I don't mind being boring. I think in your 20s you want everything to be super exciting, and then by your 40s you're like, mellow is good. If I could have an uneventful day, that would work for me as a good day. So but I see this a lot in online feedback. I see a lot of people that basically say, oh, well, you can only support the electable candidate. Nobody else should be there. And basically anybody with a personality or who's outspoken, like, none of those people should run for office. The only people who should run for office are these packaged, sanitized candidates that are, they're very winnable and they fit this formula. And those are horrible ways to run elections. I think you get bad law that way. I think you get bad governance that way. So I certainly hope that getting more fair access helps with that. I hope the lawsuit that I brought helps get us there. I mean, that seems to be the role that I'm playing in the elections that I'm in, is you win or lose, I am there to make sure our systems work for us and to make sure that, an average person can wander through this process equitably. In 2018, I made sure that ranked choice voting stayed in place. I was an active participant in the lawsuit that said, we are going to make sure that this is a thing, that it's constitutional, that the people who voted for me as number one have their number twos count. It's completely inappropriate to throw that out. I certainly was very intense with a lot of the media saying, like, you need to cover me too. I'm a real candidate. You need to put people in the paper. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that now that I'm past the thing that was sucking a lot of my time out. You're going to see a lot more of that for me. And so look for the return of me when I see newspapers covering or news sources covering the main Senate race. Look for me to push back and say, where are all the candidates? How come you only quoted the top two? How come you're not polling using our voting system? You can't just do a two-pony race in a race that's going to have, a Democrat, 2 to 3 independents, and a Republican. You're doing it wrong. And if you're going to stick your nose in Maine's politics, make sure you know what the heck you're doing. So are there any other questions? I feel like I've gone on for quite a while. I try to make myself as accessible as possible. Last call for questions. All right. I'm looking forward to a crazy day tomorrow. A little bit of a time out from my regular workday on Thursday so that I can get the staples out of my head, and catching up on work this week, and then hopefully starting Monday, I'm hoping that I'll be able to do a lot more digital campaigning. I'll see you guys back at Breakfast with Tiffany on Saturday. And if you have any questions, notify me on social media. Please tell your friends. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm on Twitter at Tiffany Bond. And let's see what we can do to make politics accessible to everyone. Thanks.